You've found the right place. This is Tales After Midnight. We've been to the frozen north. We've sat through the long Japanese dark with candles burning down around us. Tonight we're going somewhere different. Tonight we're going into the forest. The Slavic forest. Russian, Ukrainian, Romanian, Polish, is not like other forests. It goes on, not for miles, but for days, for weeks. It has its own spirits and its own rules, and the people who lived at its edge told stories about it the way you tell stories about a neighbour you're not sure you trust. We have 8 stories for you tonight. A girl who walked to the witch's hut and came back carrying fire in a skull. Dead women dancing in a meadow. A house spirit who braids your horse's mane. An immortal whose death is hidden inside a needle, inside an egg, inside a duck. The dead who come home for dinner. The thing at the bottom of the river. The forest that walks you in circles, and the goddess of winter who burns every spring and always comes back. If you're new here, this is what we do. Long nights, old stories, told slowly enough to fall asleep to. Leave this playing. Each tale stands alone. If you drift off in the 3rd and wake in the 7th, you haven't missed a thing. If you've been here before, welcome back. Different country tonight. Same dark. Now, dim whatever needs dimming. The stove is warm, the fire is low, and outside the window the birch trees are silver in the dark. Get comfortable. Pull the covers up. There's no rush. We have all night and all the forest we need. Let's begin. Our first story tonight is the oldest one. Older than the country it comes from. Older than the language it's told in now. It has been carried from mouth to mouth across Russia for longer than anyone can count. The way a fire is carried from one hearth to the next. Never quite the same flame, but never allowed to go out. It is a story about a girl, and the forest, and a witch, and about what it costs to bring light back to a house that has gone dark. There was once a merchant who lived at the edge of a great forest with his wife and their daughter, a girl named Vasilisa. They were not rich and they were not poor. They had a wooden house with a good stove and enough land to live on, and the forest stood behind them like a wall that went on forever. When Vasilisa was 8 years old, her mother fell ill. Not the kind of illness that comes and goes, the kind that settles in and does not leave. The mother knew she was dying. She called Vasilisa to her bed, and from under her pillow she drew out a small wooden doll, no bigger than a child's hand, painted simply, with 2 black dots for eyes and a red line for a mouth. "Keep this doll with you always," her mother said. "Show it to no one. When trouble comes to you, and trouble will come, give the doll a little food and a little water, and ask her what to do. She will help you." And then the mother closed her eyes, and the candle by the bed went out, and that was the end of the beginning. The merchant grieved. A year passed, and then 2, and then he married again, as men do. a widow with 2 daughters of her own. He thought he was giving Vasilisa a mother. What he gave her was something else. The stepmother was the kind of woman who smiles with her mouth and watches with her eyes, and her 2 daughters were the same. They were not ugly. They were not stupid. They were simply hard, the way a stone is hard, smooth on the outside, and cold all the way through. They hated Vasilisa, not for anything she had done. They hated her because she was kind, and because she was beautiful, and because people looked at her and then looked away from them. That was enough. The stepmother gave Vasilisa the hardest work in the house. She carried the water from the well, 2 buckets on a yoke, heavy enough to make a grown man's shoulders ache. And she was not a grown man. She was a girl of 12. She chopped the wood and scrubbed the floors on her knees, and tended the fire before dawn, and cooked the meals, and mended the clothes, and fed the chickens, and cleaned the stable, and was never thanked for any of it. The stepsisters sat and sewed by the window, and complained about the cold. If Vasilisa passed too close, they pinched her. If she sang while she worked, they told the stepmother, and the stepmother found another task, always another task, because the cruelty was not in the work itself, but in the endlessness of it, the way the next chore was always waiting before the current one was done. But Vasilisa did not break. Every night, when the house was dark and the others were sleeping, she took out the little doll and set a crust of bread and a cup of water before it, and whispered what had happened that day. And the doll's painted eyes seemed to brighten in the firelight. And it ate the bread, or the bread was gone, which is the same thing in a story like this. And in the morning Vasilisa would wake, and the work that had seemed impossible the night before was done. The garden weeded, the grain sorted, the impossible task accomplished by small hands in the dark. Years passed this way. Vasilisa grew into a young woman, and the stepmother's hatred grew with her, because now young men came to the house asking about Vasilisa, and none of them looked twice at the other 2. One autumn, the merchant went away on business, and the stepmother saw her chance. She moved the family to a house at the very edge of the forest, where the trees pressed close and the light failed early. And one evening, she gave each girl a task, one to make lace, one to knit stockings, Vasilisa to spin thread, and she put out every candle in the house except one. Then she went to bed. The stepsisters worked in the guttering light, and one of them, on instruction, on cue, leaned close to the candle as if to trim the wick, and snuffed it out. "Oh dear," said the other, "now what shall we do? There is no fire in the whole house. Someone will have to go to Babayaga and fetch a light." Babayaga. Everyone in that country knew the name. The witch who lived in the deep forest, in a hut that stood on chicken legs and turned to face whoever approached. The fence around it was made of human bones, and the gateposts were topped with skulls whose eye sockets glowed with fire at night. She flew through the air in a mortar, rowing with a pestle, sweeping away her tracks with a broom of birch. No one went to Baba Yaga on purpose. No one came back the same. Many did not come back at all. "You go, Vasilisa," said the stepsisters, and they pushed her out the door. The night was very dark. The forest was darker. Vasilisa stood at the edge of the trees and felt the darkness push back against her like a hand on her chest. She took out the doll and held it close and whispered, "Little doll, they have sent me to Baba Yaga for fire. Baba Yaga eats people. What should I do?" And the doll said, "Go where you are sent. Keep me with you. No harm will come to you." So Vasilisa walked into the forest. She walked all night. The trees closed in around her, and the path narrowed to a thread, and the only sound was her own breathing and the doll's weight in her pocket. At dawn, a horseman rode past her, all in white. White horse, white cloak, white face, and behind him the sky turned pale. Morning had come, carried on horseback. She walked on. At noon, another horseman, all in red. Red horse, red armor, red as a furnace door, and the sun climbed high and hot. She walked on. At dusk, the trees opened, and she saw it. The hut. Standing in a clearing on two enormous chicken legs, turning slowly, as if deciding whether to look at her. The fence was bones, sun-bleached and old, driven into the earth like posts. Every fence post was topped with a human skull, and the skulls were dark, all except one. And as she stood there, a third horseman rode past her, all in black. Black horse, black cloak, and he rode straight into the clearing, and the night fell behind him like a curtain, and every skull on the fence lit up at once, eyes blazing, filling the clearing with a cold white light. Vasilisa could not move. She could not go forward, and she would not go back. And the doll was warm in her pocket, and the skulls burned like lanterns, and the hut turned on its legs until its door faced her, and the door opened, and there was Baba Yaga. Not beautiful, not ugly in the way of fairy tale witches. Old, impossibly old, thin as a fence rail, with iron teeth, and a nose so long it pressed against the ceiling when she stood. She sat in the mortar, the way another woman would sit in a chair, and she looked at Vasilisa the way a bird looks at a seed, deciding. "I smell Russian bone," said Baba Yaga. "Who is there?" Vasilisa bowed, because you bow to power, even power that might eat you, and said, "Grandmother, my stepsisters sent me to you for fire. Our house is dark." Baba Yaga looked at her a long time. "I know your stepsisters," she said. "Very well. You may have fire, but first you will work for me. If I am satisfied, I will give you what you came for. If not, I will eat you." So Vasilisa stayed. She stayed because there was nowhere else to go. She stayed because the forest behind her was dark, and the forest ahead of her was dark, and the only light in the world was in the skulls on Baba Yaga's fence. She stayed because sometimes courage does not look like running forward. Sometimes courage looks like standing still in a place where everything wants to eat you, and doing the work anyway. The work was impossible, as the work in these stories always is. Clean the yard, sweep the hut, cook enough food for 20, sort a mountain of wheat from a mountain of dirt, grain by grain, poppy seed from poppy seed. Baba Yaga left each morning in her mortar and returned each night to inspect, and the penalty for failure was always the same. But every night, Vasilisa fed the doll a crust of bread and a sip of water, and by morning the impossible was done. The wheat was sorted, the hut was clean, the food was cooked. Baba Yaga found nothing to fault, and she was not pleased, because witches do not like to be cheated of their meals. On the third day, Baba Yaga gave her the fire. She took a skull from the fence, one with eyes still burning, and set it on a stick and put it in Vasilisa's hands. "Here is your fire," she said. "Take it to your stepsisters. That is what they asked for." Vasilisa walked home through the forest, and the skull burned on the stick ahead of her, its eyes throwing light between the trees, and nothing in the forest came near her. The light of Baba Yaga's skull was not a light that anything wanted to approach. She reached the house at the edge of the woods. The house was dark, just as she had left it. The stepsisters and the stepmother had not been able to light a single candle since she'd gone. Every match struck had gone out. Every ember brought from a neighbour's house had died on the threshold. The darkness had been waiting for this fire, and no other. Vasilisa carried the skull inside, and the skull's eyes found the stepmother, and found the stepsisters, and the light that had guided Vasilisa safely through the forest burned them where they stood. Not fire, not heat, something worse. The light saw them, and seeing was enough. By morning they were ash, and the skull's eyes were dark, and Vasilisa buried it in the garden, and never spoke of it again. She left that house. She went to the town. She lived with an old woman and spun thread. Thread so fine it could be woven into cloth that looked like water. And the cloth was brought to the Tsar, and the Tsar asked who had made it, and when he saw Vasilisa, he married her. Because that is how these stories end. But the ending is not the point. The point is the walk through the forest. The point is the girl who fed the doll a crust of bread and asked what to do, and did it. The point is that the fire she brought back was not safe. It was not kind. It was the fire of a witch, carried in a dead woman's skull, and it burned what deserved to burn. The fire in your house tonight is gentler than that, but it came from somewhere too. Someone carried it. Someone fed it. Someone kept it alive through a long, dark walk. Rest now. The fire is still burning. There is a week in the old Slavic calendar in late spring when the rivers are full, and the wheat is green, and the dead come up from the water. They called it Rusalka week, Green Week, Trinity Week in the Christian calendar, though the custom is older than any church. During that week, the women who had drowned, the ones who died unbaptized, or by their own hand, or by someone else's, came up from the rivers and the lakes, and walked in the meadows, and sat in the birch trees, and waited. They were called Rusalki, and this is their story, or as much of it as anyone has brought back. A young man, the stories never give him a name, so we won't either, lived in a village by a river. He was a farmer's son, broad-shouldered, quiet, the kind of young man who did his work without complaint, and drank without boasting, and went to bed early because there was always more work in the morning. His mother told him every spring, stay away from the river during Green Week. Don't swim, don't wash clothes at the bank, don't walk near the water after dark. She told him the way mothers tell things, firmly and with the expectation of being ignored. He was not the kind of boy who ignored his mother, but he was the kind of boy who went walking when he couldn't sleep. And on the first night of Green Week, he could not sleep. The night was warm, the kind of warm that comes only twice a year in that country, once in late spring and once in early autumn, when the air holds still and the insects sing, and you can feel the earth breathing under your feet. He walked along the river path, not toward the water, just alongside it, the way you walk alongside a sleeping animal that you do not want to wake. He heard singing, not words, not a melody he knew, something between a song and the sound a river makes over stones, a low, continuous, rising thing that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and from nowhere in particular. It pulled at him the way a current pulls at your ankles when you stand too long in the shallows. He should have turned back. He walked toward the sound instead. The meadow opened up at a bend in the river, where the water was wide and still, and the grass grew waist-high, and the birch trees stood in a loose circle, like guests at a gathering who haven't decided whether to stay. And they were there, women, 5 or 6 of them, maybe more. It was hard to count because they moved like water, one flowing into the next, pale, barefoot, hair unbound and falling past their waists, dark hair and fair hair alike, all of it wet as if they had just come up from the river. Their dresses were white, or had been white once, and clung to them like river weeds. They were dancing. Not the way village girls danced at festivals, not stomping and laughing with their hands on their hips. This was slow, circular, their feet barely touching the grass. They moved the way smoke moves when there is no wind, drifting, turning, following some rhythm he could feel in his ribs, but not in his ears. And the singing was theirs. It was coming from their mouths, though their lips hardly moved. It was coming from the water behind them, and from the birch leaves, and from the grass under their feet. And it was beautiful, in the way that very deep water is beautiful. Beautiful and absolutely indifferent to whether you survive it. One of them saw him. She did not stop dancing. She turned toward him the way a current turns, without effort, without decision, simply changing direction because something had fallen into the stream. Her face was young, younger than him. Her eyes were open and dark and wet, and there was no cruelty in them, and no kindness either. There was only attention, a complete, patient, absolute attention, the way a river pays attention to everything that enters it. She reached out her hand. Her fingers were cold. He knew they would be cold before he touched them. And he touched them anyway. The cold went up his arm and into his chest, and settled behind his heart, like a stone dropped into still water. She pulled him into the circle. He danced with them. How long, he could not say. Time in that meadow did not move the way time moved in the village. The moon stayed where it was, or it didn't. He wasn't watching the moon. He was watching her. Her wet hair swinging, her bare feet on the grass, her fingers laced through his, cold as river stones. He was not afraid. That was the strangest part. He should have been afraid. His mother's warnings were in him somewhere, buried under the singing, like a voice shouting from the bottom of a well. But the fear couldn't reach the surface. The singing was between him and the fear, and the singing was stronger. She spoke to him, not in words, or not in words he heard with his ears, but he understood her the way you understand things in dreams, the meaning arriving whole, without the trouble of language. She had been a girl from a village upstream. She had loved a boy who did not love her back. She had walked into the river on a night in autumn, and the river had kept her. That was all. That was the whole story of her life, and it had ended in the water. And what came after was not life, but not nothing either. It was this: the dancing, the meadow, the singing that never quite became words, an eternity of almost. "Stay," she said, or he felt her say. "Stay in the water with me. It is not so cold once you stop fighting it." And he wanted to. That is the part of the story that matters. Not that she pulled him. She did not pull. Her hand was open, not grasping. She was asking, not demanding. And he wanted to go with her, the way you want to close your eyes when you are very, very tired, even when you know you shouldn't. A rooster crowed. He didn't know where the sound came from. There were no farms this far from the village, and dawn was still hours away. Or it should have been. But the rooster crowed, shrill and certain, and the singing stopped, like a hand lifted from a string. The women were gone. Not fading, not dissolving. Gone. One moment the meadow was full of pale limbs and wet hair and song, and the next it was just a meadow. Grass, birch trees, the river moving quietly in the dark. He was standing in the water up to his knees. He did not remember walking in. His trousers were soaked to the thigh, and the cold was sharp now, real cold. Not the numb, dreamlike cold of her hand, but the biting cold of a river at night that wants nothing from you and will take everything. He stumbled to the bank. He sat in the grass and shook, not from the cold, from the understanding that he had been standing in the river and had not known it, and that the water had been rising around him 1 inch at a time, while the singing held him still. He went home. He didn't tell his mother. He went to bed and slept, and in the morning the grass in that meadow was pressed flat in a perfect circle, and his shoes were wet, and there was river mud between his toes. He never went back to the meadow during Green Week. He married a village girl and had children, and grew old in the ordinary way. But some nights, in late spring, when the air was warm and still, and the insects sang, he would lie in bed beside his sleeping wife and hear something that might have been the river, and might have been singing, and might have been nothing at all. And he would lie very still and wait for it to pass. The old Slavs believed that Rusalki were not evil. They were lonely. They were girls who had died with something unfinished, a love unreturned, a wrong unavenged, a life that ended before it should have. They came up from the water every spring, not to hunt, but to grieve, and the dancing was the shape their grief took, and the singing was the sound of it. And if a living man wandered too close and was pulled under, well, the river does not mean to drown you. The river is just doing what rivers do. Not every spirit in the old country lived in the forest. Some of them lived closer than that. In Russia, in Ukraine, in every country where the winters were long and the houses were small, people believed that a spirit lived behind the stove. They called it the Domovoi, the house one. Every household had one, not a ghost, not a demon, something older than either, a thing that belonged to the house itself, the way the foundation belongs to it, or the chimney, or the particular creak in the third step. No one ever saw the Domovoi clearly. That was part of the arrangement. He was glimpsed, a small figure in the corner of your eye, grey-bearded, rough-skinned, dressed in the kind of clothes the family wore, but older, shabbier, as if he'd been wearing them since the house was built. Some said he looked like the head of the household. Not exactly, more like a copy made from memory. Slightly wrong, the way a reflection is slightly wrong. He lived behind the stove, or under it, or in the space between the wall and the chimney, where the heat collects and no one looks. If you respected the Domovoi, he protected the house. He watched over the animals. He warned of fires. You would hear knocking behind the stove, sharp and urgent, 3 times, and that meant check the chimney, check the hearth. Something is wrong. He kept the mice away. He made sure the bread rose. Small kindnesses, invisible but felt. Families left offerings for him, a bowl of porridge by the stove on certain nights, a crust of bread with salt. When they moved to a new house, they carried a coal from the old stove to the new one and said, "Domovoi, Domovoi, come with us to our new home." If you forgot, if you moved without him, the new house would be cold and uneasy, and things would fall off shelves, and the milk would turn, and no one would sleep well. And the old house, empty now, would creak and knock at night, as if someone were pacing inside it, waiting. There is a story, and it comes from several villages, so it is either very true or very popular, which in folklore amounts to the same thing, about a man who did not believe. He was not a bad man. He was modern, or as modern as a man could be in a village where the roads turned to mud in spring and the nearest city was 3 days by cart. He thought the Domovoi was superstition. He told his wife not to leave porridge by the stove. He laughed at his mother when she whispered to the corners. For a while, nothing happened. The house stood. The bread rose. The animals were fine. He felt vindicated. Then small things started going wrong. Not dramatic things, not floods, not fires. The kind of things you notice only when you stop and think about how many of them have happened in a row. The milk turned sour on the same day it was drawn. Not once, but 3 times in a week. The cat began hissing at a particular corner of the room near the chimney, a corner where there was nothing to hiss at. The firewood, which the man had stacked and split himself, would not catch. He would lay the fire perfectly. Kindling, paper, dry birch, and it would smoke and gutter and go out. Again and again, as if something was sitting on the draft, blocking it, patiently, without malice, but with absolute purpose. His wife said nothing. She did not need to. Her eyes said it every time the fire went out. Then the braiding started. He went to the stable one morning and found his horse's mane braided. Not tangled, braided. Tight, intricate plaits that no human hand could have done in the dark without waking the animal. He unbraided it. The next morning, it was braided again, tighter. His wife's hair. She woke with a plait running down the back of her head that she had not put there. Their daughter's hair, the same. The dog's scruff was knotted in a pattern that looked deliberate. Then the noises. Knocking behind the stove, not the urgent warning knock, but a slow, irregular, patient tapping, like someone drumming their fingers on the inside of the wall. Always at night. Always when the house was dark. The man could not sleep. His wife could not sleep. The children cried for no reason. The cat stopped coming inside. His mother came to visit. She did not say, "I told you so." She was too smart for that. She simply put a bowl of porridge by the stove that night, with a pat of butter on top and a pinch of salt, and she said, quietly, into the corner where the wall met the chimney, "Forgive him. He did not mean to offend. He is young, and he does not know." In the morning, the bowl was empty. The horse's mane was smooth. The tapping stopped. The man started leaving porridge by the stove, every night. He did not talk about it. He did not say he believed. He just left the porridge, the way you lock the door at night. Not because you expect someone to come in, but because the ritual itself is the protection. And the house settled. Not all at once, not like turning off a switch, but over the following days, the fire caught on the first try. The milk stayed sweet. The cat stopped hissing at the corner and started sleeping near the stove again, curled in the warmest spot, which is where cats always sleep when there is nothing in the warmest spot that they are afraid of. One morning, the man came downstairs and found the porridge bowl licked clean and the fire already burning well, the logs stacked neatly, the draught drawing perfectly, though he had not set it the night before. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the empty bowl and the good fire and said nothing at all. The Domovoi is a strange kind of haunting. Not a ghost who doesn't know he's dead. Not a curse that needs lifting. Something more like a relationship. One-sided, invisible, with rules you learn only by breaking them. He doesn't speak. He doesn't show himself. He just lives there. Behind the stove, in the warmest part of the house. And he keeps the fire burning. Or he doesn't. And you never know which, until you've already made the mistake. The old families understood this. They didn't worship the Domovoi. They lived with him. The way you live with the weather, or with the house itself. Paying attention, leaving small offerings, respecting the thing you can hear, but never see. If your house creaks tonight, it is just the wood settling. Probably. But leave a little something by the door anyway. It costs nothing, and the old ones knew what they were doing. There is a villain in the old Russian stories who cannot die. Not because he is strong, not because he is clever, because he has done something no one else thought to do. He has taken his death out of his body and hidden it somewhere else. His name is Koschei, and they call him the Deathless. And this is how he was undone. There was a prince named Ivan, the youngest of 3 brothers, which in Russian stories means he is either the fool or the hero, and sometimes both. Ivan was kind. He was not particularly clever. He was the sort of person things happen to, rather than the sort who makes things happen. And the story pushed him forward the way a river pushes a leaf, not because the leaf chose the direction, but because the current was going that way. Ivan's 3 sisters married in quick succession, one to an eagle, one to a falcon, one to a raven. Not men dressed as birds, shape changers, sorcerers, princes of the air, who came to the palace in feathers and left with brides. Ivan gave his blessing each time because the sisters wished it, and because you do not argue with someone who can become a thunderstorm. With his sisters gone, the palace was empty, and Ivan grew restless. And so he rode out into the world to find them, and to find something of his own. He found Maria Morevna instead. Maria Morevna was a warrior queen, not a princess locked in a tower, not a girl waiting to be rescued. She led armies, she rode at the head of her own soldiers, and she had won every battle she had ever fought. And when Ivan met her on the road, she was returning from a war with dust on her armor, and other people's blood on her sword. And she looked at him and decided he would do. They married. They were happy. For a time. But Maria Morevna had a secret. In her palace there was a room that was always locked. 12 chains across the door, 12 locks. And Maria told Ivan plainly, "Open any door in this palace. Go anywhere you like. But do not open this one." She rode to war again. She left him with the keys, and the warning, and the locked door, and the silence of an empty palace. You already know what he did. Ivan opened the door. Behind it, chained to the wall with 12 chains, thin as a fence post, withered, barely alive, was a man. Or something shaped like a man. Old beyond reckoning, with skin like leather pulled over bone, and eyes that burned in their sockets like the last coals of a fire that refuses to go out. "Water," said the chained thing. "In the name of God, give me water. I have been chained here for 10 years, and I have not had a drop to drink." Ivan pitied him. Ivan was kind, and kindness in these stories is never safe. He brought a bucket of water. The chained man drank it in one swallow. He brought a second, a third. With each bucket, the chains groaned. The figure straightened. Colour came back to the leather skin. The burning eyes grew brighter. At the third bucket, Koschei the Deathless burst his chains like thread, and the wall cracked behind him, and the room shook, and he was free. He was gone before Ivan could speak. He flew, not with wings, but the way storms fly, fast and black and inevitable. And he found Maria Morevna on the road, and took her, carried her away to his own kingdom, his own dark palace. And there was nothing she could do, because Koschei's power, restored, was the kind of power that does not negotiate. Ivan followed. The first time, he found Maria alone in Koschei's palace while the sorcerer was away. They fled on the fastest horse in the stable, Koschei's own, and they rode for 3 days, and on the third day, Koschei caught them, because his horse was faster than any stolen copy of itself. And he landed in front of them on the road like a thunderclap, and took Maria back. He let Ivan go, because Maria begged, and because even Koschei was not immune to the particular power of a woman he wanted to keep. The second time, Ivan tried again, the same way, because courage without strategy looks exactly like this. Koschei caught them again, faster this time, and let Ivan go again, not because Maria begged, though she did, but out of the contempt you show a thing too small to fear. A flick of the hand. Go, you bore me. The third time, Koschei said, "If I catch you again, I will cut you to pieces." And his voice was flat when he said it, which was worse than anger, because it meant he was not threatening. He was describing. Ivan needed help. He went to his sisters, the ones who had married the eagle, the falcon, and the raven. Each husband received him kindly, but what they gave him was not an army. They gave him information. "There is a way to kill Koschei," they said, "but his death is not in his body. His death is at the end of a needle. The needle is in an egg. The egg is in a duck. The duck is in a hare. The hare is in an iron chest. The chest is buried under a great oak. The oak stands on the island of Buyan, in the middle of the ocean, at the edge of the world." Ivan went. He crossed mountains where the wind cut through his clothes and the path was ice and loose stone. He crossed plains where the grass stretched to the horizon and the sky was so wide it made him feel like a speck on a page. He ran out of bread on the 4th day and kept walking. He ate berries when he found them, and drank from streams, and slept in the open, with his coat for a blanket and the stars for a ceiling. He walked until his boots wore through, and he wrapped his feet in strips of cloth and kept walking. And his iron walking staff wore down to a nub, and he leaned on it anyway, because a man who is walking to the edge of the world needs something to lean on, even if it is too short to help. Along the way, he met a bear, caught in a snare, and freed it, though the bear was large enough to kill him, and the snare would have held until morning. He met a pike gasping in a stream that had dried to a trickle, and carried it to deeper water. He met a hawk tangled in a hunter's net, and cut the cords with his knife. He showed them kindness, the same reckless kindness that had freed Koschei in the first place. And this time the kindness came back to him. He found the island. He found the oak. He dug up the chest. The hare burst from the chest and ran. The bear caught it. The duck burst from the hare and flew. The hawk struck it down. The egg fell from the duck into the sea. The pike dove and brought it back. Ivan held the egg in his hands. Inside it, he could feel something. Not heat, not a heartbeat, but something like the memory of both. A trembling. The concentrated essence of a life that had been running for centuries and was suddenly, terribly, in someone else's hands. He broke the egg. Inside was the needle. Thin, silver. Not much to look at. Certainly not much to contain the death of an immortal. But when he snapped it, somewhere far away, in a dark palace on the edge of the world, Koschei the Deathless fell. Just like that. A needle breaks, and an immortal dies. No battle, no final words. He simply stopped, the way a clock stops when you remove the spring. And all the centuries he had borrowed came due at once. And what was left was dust, and the faint smell of something very old, finally finished. Maria Morevna was free. Ivan was alive. They rode home together, and the story ends the way these stories end, with a feast and a homecoming, and the door locked against the night. But the thing I want you to carry into sleep is the image of the needle. Think about that. A man who could not be killed by any sword, any army, any power on earth, undone by the smallest, simplest thing, hidden at the center of 6 impossible shells, each one inside the last, like a secret told in whispers that grow quieter and quieter, until the last whisper is silence. That is Koschei. All that power, and in the end, a needle. In Romania, the dead do not always leave. Not ghosts, not memories. The dead themselves, in their bodies, in their clothes, sitting at the table where they sat in life, eating the food they ate in life, looking at you with eyes that are almost right, but not quite. They are called Strigoi. And yes, Romania is not quite Slavic, but the Carpathian villages share a border and a darkness with their Slavic neighbours, and the dead do not respect national boundaries. The Strigoi are older than the stories you've heard about Romanian monsters, older than the castles, older than the capes, older than the count. The Strigoi were here first. The village dead, the familiar dead, the ones who come back not as strangers, but as family. That is what makes them terrible. There was a woman. Call her Anna, because the stories don't always give names, who lived in a village in the foothills of the Carpathians. She was married to a man named Gheorghe, a quiet man, a farmer, the kind who came home each evening smelling of hay and sweat, and sat at the same chair, at the same table, and ate whatever she had made, and said very little. They had been married 12 years. They had 2 children, a boy who looked like his father, and a girl who looked like neither of them, which happens sometimes, and means nothing. Gheorghe died in autumn. A fever took him, 3 days of burning, and then a 4th day of stillness. And then the women came to wash the body, and the priest came to say the words, and they buried him in the churchyard, on a cold, bright afternoon, with the leaves coming down. Anna grieved. The village grieved with her, in the way that villages do. Food left at the door, neighbours sitting with her in the evenings, the children taken in by an aunt for the first bad week. It was ordinary grief, the kind that has a shape and a duration and an end, eventually. 3 weeks after the funeral, Anna woke in the night and heard someone in the kitchen. Not a thief, not a neighbour. She knew the sound of her own kitchen, the creak of the 3rd floorboard, the way the chair scraped on the stone, the particular clink of the clay bowl she set out every evening. Someone was sitting at the table. Someone was eating. She lay in bed and did not move. After a long time, the sounds stopped. The chair scraped again. The door opened and closed, quietly, the way Gheorghe used to close it, lifting the latch rather than letting it drop, because the children were sleeping. In the morning, the bowl was empty. The bread she had left on the table was gone. The chair was pulled out from the table, at the angle he always pulled it. Not square, but turned a little, the way a left-handed man sits. She told no one. What would she say? My dead husband came to eat? They would think she was mad with grief. They would think she was dreaming. She half thought so herself. But it happened again the next night. And the next. On the 4th night, she did not lie in bed. She sat in the dark kitchen and waited. The door opened at midnight. And there was Gheorghe. Not a ghost, not transparent, not glowing, not hovering above the floor. He was solid. He was wearing the clothes they had buried him in, the good shirt, the dark trousers, the boots she had polished before the funeral. His face was his face. His hands were his hands. He walked the way he had always walked, heavy, flat-footed, leaning a little to the left where his bad knee bothered him. He sat down at the table. He looked at the empty bowl. He looked at Anna. His eyes were almost right. Almost. The colour was the same, brown, deep-set, The eyes she had looked into for 12 years. But there was something behind them that hadn't been there before. Not malice, not hunger. Something more like absence. As if the eyes were working, but the thing that had looked out through them was gone. And what looked out now was the looking itself, without a person behind it. Anna put bread on the table. She poured water into the bowl. She did this because her hands knew what to do, even when her mind did not. 12 years of feeding a man does not stop because he is dead. He ate, slowly, methodically, the way he had always eaten. He did not speak. He did not look at her again. When he was finished, he stood, and he left, and the door closed behind him with the latch lifted, because the children were sleeping. This went on for weeks. Anna grew thin. The children grew quiet. Not because they saw their father. They didn't. He came only when they slept. But they felt it. The house felt wrong. The way a room feels wrong after someone has been in it who shouldn't have been. A heaviness. A coolness in the air. The cat refused to sleep inside. Anna's sister noticed. She came to visit and saw the shadows under Anna's eyes and the half-eaten bread on the table and the chair pulled out at that angle. And she said, "Who has been here?" And Anna told her. The sister did not think she was mad. In that village, in those hills, the Strigoi were not stories. They were known. Every old woman had a method. Every family had a memory. They went to the churchyard at noon, because you do this in daylight, when the Strigoi sleep. And they found Georgi's grave, and the sister crossed herself, and they dug. The body was unchanged. 3 weeks in the earth, and the face was the same, the hands were the same, the clothes were clean, and the lips were dark, with what might have been wine, or might have been blood, or might have been bread and water, eaten at midnight in a kitchen that was no longer his. They did what the village knew to do. I will not describe it in detail, because you are trying to sleep, and some images are not for the dark. But the tradition was specific. A stake of hawthorn, garlic in the mouth. The body turned face down in the grave, so that if it tried to dig, it would dig the wrong direction. They reburied him. They went home. That night, Anna sat in the kitchen again. Same chair, same dark, same hour. She waited until well past midnight, until the candle she had lit burned down to a stub, and the house was quiet, in a way that felt different from the quiet of the last 3 weeks. Not the quiet of something waiting, the quiet of something gone. The chair stayed where it was. The bread stayed on the table. The door did not open. She waited 2 more nights, to be sure. Both nights, nothing. The house was just a house again. Wood and stone, and the smell of bread, and the sound of children breathing in the next room, and the cat sleeping by the stove. Anna slept that night, and every night after. But she told her daughter, years later, that the worst part was not the fear. The worst part was the moment of recognition, seeing his face, knowing it was him, knowing it was not him, and not being able to tell where the one ended and the other began. That is the Strigoi, not a stranger in the dark, the person you loved, wearing the same face, doing the same things, with something essential missing. The chair is where it should be in your house tonight. The door is shut, and everyone you love is exactly who they are. Every river in the old country had a master. Not a god, exactly. Not a demon. Something between the two. A spirit as old as the water itself, who lived at the bottom where the current was coldest and the light never reached, and the mud was black and deep and soft. They called him the Vodyanoy, the water one, and the millers, the fishermen, the women who washed clothes at the river, they all knew his name, even if they didn't say it out loud after dark. He looked like an old man. That was the common description. An old man with a green beard, tangled with riverweed, and skin the colour of silt. Sometimes he was fat and slick like a catfish. Sometimes thin and pale like a drowned thing. His eyes were large and round and never blinked, and water dripped from him constantly, even when he was on dry land, which was rare. He sat at the bottom of the deepest pool, usually near a mill, because mills were built where the water was strong, and the strong water was where he lived. He kept his court there, if you could call it a court. The drowned were his subjects. Every person who died in the river became part of his household, tending his underwater gardens, herding his cattle, which were catfish, enormous, dark-backed, slow-moving things the size of logs. The millers knew him best. They had to. Their livelihood sat on top of his home, and a Vodyanoy who felt disrespected could break a mill wheel with one hand, dam the channel with his body, flood the building, drown the miller's best horse. So the millers left offerings. The first fish of the catch, thrown back alive with a word of thanks. A pinch of tobacco tossed into the current. Bread on the bank at midnight. Some millers, the old ones, the ones who took the traditions seriously, would pour a cup of vodka into the river on the first day of spring and say, "Wake well, grandfather. The ice is gone. The mill is yours." This kept the peace. Mostly. There is a story from a village on the Volga, or the Don, or the Dnieper. It changes with the telling. About a man who drowned on a clear day. He was young, a strong swimmer. He knew the river the way a farmer knows his field. Every shallow, every deep place, every rock and every current. He had swum this stretch 100 times. There was no storm, no flood. The water was calm and warm, and the sun was high. His friends were on the bank. They saw him wade in. They saw him swim to the middle. They saw him stop. Not struggling, not calling for help. He simply stopped, the way a clock stops, treading water one moment and not treading the next. His head went under, came back up, went under again. His arms didn't move. His face, what they could see of it, was blank. Not afraid, not in pain, just blank. They went in after him. 2 of them, strong swimmers both. They reached the place where he had gone down and found the water there was cold. Not cool, cold. river bottom cold, ice melt cold, in the middle of a warm summer river. A column of cold water reaching up from the bottom, like a hand. They pulled him out. He was dead. No marks, no injuries, no water in his lungs, which was the part that the doctor could not explain. A man who drowned without drowning. His face was calm, not the calm of resignation, but the calm of someone who has simply gone somewhere else and does not mind being there. His eyes were open. They closed them before his mother came. The river flowed on, indifferent. By evening, the cold spot was gone. By the next day, children were swimming there again, because children forget, and rivers don't warn. The old women in the village said the Vodyanoy had taken him, not because the young man had done anything wrong, not because he had failed to leave offerings or spoken disrespectfully of the water. The Vodyanoy took people sometimes, the way a river takes things, without malice, without warning, because the river is the river, and what falls in belongs to it. That was the understanding. They said the drowned did not suffer, or perhaps they only said that because the alternative was unbearable. Down at the bottom, in the Vodyanoy's court, they lived a kind of life, slow, green, silent. They tended the underwater gardens where the water lilies grew from below. They herded the catfish through the channels and the deep pools. They sat in the silt and felt the current move over them, the way the wind moves over wheat. And they did not remember the surface. Or they remembered it the way you remember a dream. Bright, distant, not quite real. The sun was up there somewhere, but it didn't matter anymore. Down here the light was green and even, and nothing changed very quickly, and there was no need to breathe. There is a version of the story, darker, told less often, where the drowned do remember. They remember the sun, and the taste of bread, and the feeling of dry clothes, and the faces of people who loved them. They remember all of it, and they sit in the silt and watch the light moving far above them, green, distant, unreachable, and they want to go back, and they cannot, because the Vodyanoy's court has no doors, and the river only flows one way for the dead. That version is harder to live with. But the old women who told it were not in the business of comfort. They were in the business of keeping children out of the water after dark. The Vodyanoy was not hated. That is the strange part. The millers who knew him best did not think of him as evil. He was a force, like gravity, like winter, like the river itself. You did not fight him. You lived alongside him. You left your bread on the bank, and you did not swim after dark. And you taught your children to respect the water. And most of the time, that was enough. Most of the time. The rivers in your country are tamer now. Dammed, channeled, bridged. No one leaves bread on the bank anymore, but the deep pools are still cold at the bottom, and the water still takes people on clear days, and no one ever explains it quite right. Perhaps the Vodyanoy is sleeping. Perhaps he is patient. The forest in Russia is not like the forests you know. It goes on. Not for miles, for days, for weeks. The taiga stretches from the Urals to the Pacific, and there are places in it where no human foot has ever fallen. And the trees are so old, they remember a time before axes. The Russians have a word for it. They say the forest is temny, which means dark, but also dense, but also uncertain, but also the kind of dark that has a mind behind it. The forest is not empty. The forest is watching. The spirit of the forest is the Leshy. He looks like a man most of the time. A tall man dressed in rough clothes with bark brown skin and green eyes that catch the light sideways, like a cat's. But things are wrong about him if you look closely. His shadow falls the wrong direction. His left shoe is on his right foot. His coat is buttoned backwards. Small things. The kind of things you might not notice until you've been talking to him for 10 minutes and suddenly can't remember which direction you came from. That is what the Leshy does. He makes you lost. There was a woodcutter. There is always a woodcutter, because the forest and the axe are the oldest relationship in Russia, who worked the edge of a great forest near a village that I will not name, because there are a dozen versions of this story, and each one claims a different village. He knew his stretch of forest the way you know the rooms of your house. Every path, every stream, every clearing where the light came through. He had worked these woods for 30 years. His father had worked them before him. The trees were not strangers. One autumn morning, he went deeper than usual. Not much, an extra hour's walk, following a stand of good timber that he hadn't noticed before. The trees were tall and straight, perfect for building, and there were a lot of them. And he kept walking, and the stand kept going. And when he turned to go back, the path was gone. Not overgrown, not hard to find, gone, as if it had never been there. He was not a panicking man. He was a woodcutter. He knew how to find his way by the sun, by the moss on the trees, by the slope of the ground. He turned south. The village was south, and walked. After an hour, he came to a clearing he did not recognize. Not alarming, he was deeper than usual. He crossed it and kept walking south. After another hour, he came to the same clearing. He knew it was the same one, the same fallen birch at the western edge, the same cluster of mushrooms by the rock, the same angle of light through the canopy. He had walked in a straight line for an hour and arrived where he started. He tried again. East this time. Walked for an hour, carefully, marking trees with his axe as he went. A notch on every 10th trunk, deep enough to show white wood. He counted 10 trees, 20, 30. A straight line east, as sure as a man can walk without a compass, in a forest where the trees all look alike. The clearing again. He could see his own boot prints in the grass. from the last time he crossed it. The marks on the trees were gone, not grown over, gone, as if the bark had healed itself, or as if the trees he'd marked were not the same trees anymore. He tried south again, then north. He tried following the stream, reasoning that water always goes downhill, and downhill always leads out. The stream led him in a circle. Water does not flow in circles. Water obeys gravity. But this water did not. Or gravity in this part of the forest was not working the way gravity should. He sat down on the fallen birch and thought. The sun was moving in the sky, which meant time was passing, but it was moving in the wrong direction. Or the shadows were falling at angles that didn't match the sun. Or the trees had rearranged themselves while he wasn't looking. He couldn't tell. That was the worst part, not being lost, but not being able to trust his own senses. Then he heard whistling. Not a bird, a man's whistle. Tuneless, idle. The kind of whistling someone does when they're walking alone and not in a hurry. It came from everywhere. From the left, then the right, then behind him, then from above. He never saw the Leshy clearly. A shape between two trees, taller than a man should be. Or was that just the angle? A face that might have been bark, or might have been a bearded man, grinning at a joke only the forest understood. Green eyes, catching the last light, and then gone. The woodcutter's grandmother had told him what to do if the Leshy took him. He remembered it now, sitting on the birch log with the light failing and the whistling circling him like a bird that won't land. Take off your coat and put it on inside out. Take off your boots and put the left on the right foot and the right on the left. Backwards. Mirror him. The Leshy lives in the world reversed. His shadow is wrong. His buttons are wrong. His path leads in circles. To escape him, you become wrong too. You match his frequency. You become uninteresting to a creature that feeds on the disoriented. He felt foolish. A grown man, a woodcutter for 30 years, sitting in the forest with his coat inside out and his boots on the wrong feet. But he stood up, and he walked, and the clearing did not come back. The trees thinned, the light steadied, the shadows fell where shadows should fall. After half an hour, he hit the path, his path, the one he had walked 1,000 times, and it led him home, as if nothing had happened. He told the story later, at the tavern, over a cup of something warm, and some men laughed, and some did not. The ones who had worked the deep forest did not laugh. They had their own stories, paths that moved, clearings that repeated, the feeling of being watched by something that found you amusing in the way that a cat finds a beetle amusing. Not with cruelty, but with the idle attention of something that could crush you, and simply hasn't bothered. One of the older men said he had met the Leshy twice. The first time, as a boy, he had wandered off the path and found himself in a part of the forest he had never seen, though he had lived beside it all his life. The trees were taller there. The light was wrong. The birdsong had stopped. He turned around and every direction looked the same, and then he sat down and cried, because he was 9 years old, and the forest was very large, and he was very small. And the crying worked. That was the strange part. As soon as he admitted he was lost, not in his head but out loud, with tears, the path appeared. 3 steps to his left, clear as day, leading straight home, as if the forest had been waiting for exactly that. The admission, the concession. You win. I am yours. Now let me go. The Leshy does not kill. That is important. He is not the Rusalka, pulling you under. He is not Koschei, stealing your wife. He is the forest, reminding you that you are a guest, and the forest has its own geometry, and your compass and your axe mean nothing here. He leads you in circles until you admit you are lost. That's all he wants. The admission. The moment when you stop trusting your map and start trusting the forest. And then he lets you go home. Not everything in the Slavic wild is hostile. Some of it is worse than hostile. Some of it is beautiful. In the mountains of Serbia, of Croatia, of the old countries where the Balkans rise sharp and sudden from the lowlands, there are spirits called Vile. We will say Vila, because tonight we are meeting only one. She is a woman, or she looks like one, tall, slender, with hair that falls past her waist and eyes the colour of high-altitude sky, that impossible blue that you only see above the tree line, where the air is thin and the light has nothing left to scatter through. She dances on mountain tops. She rides the storm. She can heal a wound or cause one, cure a fever or start a plague, call the rain or hold it back. She is not good. She is not evil. She is wild, in the oldest sense of the word, the sense that means not yours. There was a shepherd, a young man named Marco, who kept his flock on the high pastures above a village in the Dinaric Alps. He was good at his work, patient, quiet, the kind of person animals trust because he moved slowly and did not raise his voice. He knew the mountains. He had walked them since boyhood, and his father before him, and he knew the places where the grass grew sweet, and the places where the rock was loose, and the places where you did not go. Every shepherd knew the places where you did not go. There was a meadow, high above the tree line, where the wildflowers grew so thick they looked painted, purple and yellow and white, too vivid, too perfect, the way things are too perfect in dreams. In the centre of the meadow, the grass was always flat, pressed down in a circle, as if something heavy had lain there, or as if someone had been dancing in the same place for a very long time. His father had told him, "Do not go to that meadow. Do not watch from the ridge. Do not listen if you hear singing. And above all, do not speak to her if she speaks to you." Marco was not a fool. He had respected the mountain's rules for 20 years. But one evening in midsummer, when the light lasted until midnight and the air was warm even at altitude, he lost a lamb. The flock was settled for the night in the stone enclosure his grandfather had built. He counted them, because you always count them, and one was missing. A young one, white, born that spring. He searched the near slopes, the rock falls, the stream crossing where lambs sometimes wandered. Nothing. The trail went up, toward the meadow. He found the lamb at the edge of the meadow, standing perfectly still, ears forward, looking at something he could not see. It was not afraid. It was not grazing. It was just standing there, the way animals stand when they hear a sound too high for human ears. Marco reached for the lamb, and then he heard the singing. It came from the center of the meadow, from the flattened circle, and it was not like the Rusalka's song, not drowning music, not a pull. It was sharp, clear, high and bright, like a blade held up to the light, a voice that did not invite you closer, but did not tell you to leave, because it did not care whether you were there or not. It was singing for itself. She was standing in the circle, white dress, long hair, bare feet on the crushed flowers. Her face was turned away from him, which was a mercy, because the stories said that seeing a Vila's face was like looking at the sun. You could do it, but you would not be the same afterward. Marco did not speak. He remembered his father's words, the way you remember a prayer, not because you believe every word, but because the words themselves are a kind of anchor, a line back to the world you came from. He kept his hand on the lamb and his eyes on the ground, and he tried to back away, one step, then another, his boots loud in the grass, his breathing loud in his chest. She stopped singing. The silence was worse than the song. In the song there was a kind of order, notes following notes, a pattern, something the mind could hold. In the silence there was only the mountain, and the wind, and the sense that something very large was paying attention to something very small. "You are polite," she said. Her voice was not what he expected. Not sweet, not seductive. It was the voice of the mountain itself, low, resonant, with the echo of stone in it and the coldness of water that has never seen the sun. "Most men look," she said. "Most men speak. You did neither." Marco said nothing. His hand was on the lamb. His eyes were on the ground. His heart was doing something complicated in his chest that he would not have been able to describe, even if someone had asked. "Take your lamb," she said, "and come back tomorrow night, alone." He took the lamb. He went down the mountain. He did not look back. He did not go back the next night, or the night after. His father's voice was louder than hers, and his father's voice said, "The Vila gives gifts, and every gift has a price, and the price is never what you think it will be." The stories were full of men who had gone to the Vila. Some came back with the gift of healing. They could cure any wound, mend any bone, draw any fever. But they could never love a human woman again, because after the Vila, every face looked plain, and every voice sounded dull, and every touch felt like touching the wrong thing. Some came back with the gift of music. They could play any instrument, sing any song, and the music would make grown men weep, and children fall silent, and animals lie down. But they could never stop playing, not really, because the music was not theirs, it was hers, lent but not given, and it played in their heads even when their hands were still. Some did not come back at all. Marco stayed away. He kept his flock on the lower pastures. He married a village girl named Katerina, who smelled like bread and wool, and whose voice was ordinary and warm, and whose face he could look at without going blind. She was kind. She was real. She did not make his heart do complicated things. She made it do simple things. Steady things. The way a good fire makes a room warm without anyone having to think about it. He was happy. In the way that people are happy when they have chosen the smaller, safer, possible thing over the larger, dangerous, impossible one. And he knew he had made the right choice. He knew it every morning when Katerina handed him bread, and every evening when the children climbed into his lap. He knew it with certainty. Certainty and peace are not the same thing, but on certain nights, in midsummer, when the air was warm even at altitude, and the light lasted until midnight, he would step outside his house and look up at the mountain and listen. And sometimes, very faintly, carried down on the wind from the high meadow, he thought he heard singing. The villa is not angry that he didn't come back. The villa does not need him. She was here before the village, and she will be here after. She dances in the circle because the dancing is what she is, not because anyone is watching. That is what makes her frightening. Not cruelty, not hunger, indifference. The same indifference as the mountain, as the storm, as the altitude. She is not trying to hurt you. She is not trying to help you. She is simply there, and you are simply small, and the gap between those two things is the whole of the horror. The last story tonight is not a ghost story. It is something older than ghosts. It is about the thing that every story in every cold country is secretly about. The end of winter. The hope that the dark does not last forever. The evidence, renewed each year, that it doesn't. Her name is Morana. In every Slavic country, from Poland to Serbia, from Russia to the Czech lands, people made an effigy in late winter, a figure of straw and rags, dressed in white, sometimes with a painted face and sometimes without, propped up in the village square or carried through the streets by children who were laughing, because children always laugh at the things that frighten them. They called her Morana, Marzanna in Polish, Morena, Mara, the goddess of winter and of death, because in the old understanding those were the same thing, the cold and the dark and the stopping. She ruled the half of the year when the ground was hard and the rivers were locked and nothing grew, and every spring, on the equinox or thereabouts, they killed her. Not quietly, not solemnly. They carried her through the village with singing, rough, cheerful singing, the kind that's more shouting than melody, and they brought her to the river, and they set her on fire, and they threw what was left of her into the water. The fire for the dying, the water for the carrying away, both elements at once, because winter does not go gently, and the ritual had to be thorough. This was not symbolic in the way we mean the word now. They did not think of it as a metaphor. Morana was winter. If you did not burn her, winter would not end. The frost would stay in the ground. The seeds would not sprout. The sheep would die. The children would go hungry. So they burned her, and they threw her in the river, and they went home and waited. And spring came. It always came. But there is a part of the tradition that is rarely mentioned, because it does not fit the celebration. In some villages, after the burning, after the singing, after the fire had eaten the straw and the river had carried the ashes, one person was chosen to walk home the long way. Not through the village, not with the others, alone, through the fields, past the last houses, along the edge of the forest, where the snow was still deep and the spring had not reached yet. This person walked slowly. They did not sing. They did not hurry. They were walking Morana home, escorting her back to the place where winter lives when it is not winter. The cold ground, the dark soil, the place under the snow where roots sleep and seeds wait, and death rests between shifts. Because you do not only burn her, you also thank her. The cold preserved the grain through autumn. The frost killed the insects that would have eaten the crop. The snow insulated the earth so the roots could survive. Winter is not the enemy. Winter is the rest. And Morana is the one who keeps the rest from being disturbed. There is something I find comforting about Morana, not the burning. That part is violent and loud and not for sleeping. What I find comforting is that she comes back. Every year, they burn her. Every year, she returns. The cycle does not break. Winter is not defeated. It is completed. It runs its course and recedes, and the world warms, and everything that was buried under snow is still there, waiting, unchanged, patient. The Slavic calendar is built on this rhythm: dark and light, cold and warm, death and return. Not a line, a circle. Nothing ends that does not begin again. The goddess of death is also the proof that death is not permanent. They still burn her, you know. In Poland, in Czech villages, in Slovakia. Every March, children make a straw figure and carry her to the river and set her alight. And it is the same ritual it was 1,000 years ago, and 1,000 years before that. One of the oldest continuously practiced traditions in Europe, a ritual that has outlasted empires and churches and revolutions, because the winter still comes, and the winter still ends, and someone has to do the work of showing it the door. It is late now. The fire in this story is burning down, the way all fires do. Morana has been carried to the river, and the river has taken her away. And what comes next is the green and the growing, and the slow, warm days that you have earned by sitting through the dark. That is where we'll leave you tonight, at the turning point. The worst of the cold is behind you, and the fire is low, and the morning is coming. the way it always comes, and there is nothing left to be afraid of that will not be gone by dawn. Nine stories. 9 fires burned down to embers. Tonight we met a girl who walked to the witch's hut and came back carrying fire in a dead woman's skull. We watched the drowned dance in a summer meadow and heard their singing that was not quite singing. We learned to leave porridge by the stove for the thing that lives in the walls. We followed a prince to the end of the world to break a needle that held a sorcerer's death. We sat in a dark kitchen and watched a dead man eat. We heard the Vodyanoy's river go quiet. We walked in circles through a forest that was laughing at us. We heard a mountain fairy sing and had the good sense not to follow. And we burned the goddess of winter and threw her in the river and waited for spring. The old Slavs told these stories around the pech, the great stove that was the heart of the house, the only warm place in the long winter. They told them to fill the dark with something, because a dark that has stories in it is easier to bear than a dark that has nothing. The fire is low now. The stories are done. The forest is outside where it belongs, and the door is shut, and the stove is warm, and the morning is coming, the way it always comes. Rest easy. Sleep well. Good night.